Hey, what is up, you rapscallion recruiters? This is Dave Stephen Patterson. You know me as DSP. And we have right over here, oops, sorry, right over there, we have, yeah, which way do I go? As I can turn around opposite. So this is the one and only Chris Wessel. Chris, how you doing today, man?
Doing pretty good. I'd like to point out to everybody who's watching us that the show has 50% more hair this week because unfortunately the esteemed Neil Levovitz was had called away to do some real work. But we'll try
Yeah,
to
I
we'll
mean,
try to represent him the best we can.
this show just got a lot sexier.
I mean, what can I
And,
say?
and and unfortunately, Neil Lebovitz is not here to defend himself. So
Which
we
is
can
the
talk.
best time to talk about him.
It's the best time to talk about him. Boy, do we love talking smack about Neil. And of course, I'm sure on the day I miss, I'm sure you guys be talking smack about me.
That's just how it
So
goes. Whoever's not there, he. And by the way, he has to pick next week's topic because he wasn't here. So that's his. That's
Oh, that's right. Okay, yes. And the topic will be why Neil didn't show up for the show. Let's talk an entire hour just about that topic. Just kidding, Neil. If you're listening to this, we are just kidding.
How's your
Anyway,
week going, Dave? How's things on your end? What's going on with you?
these are going pretty good, actually. These are going great. I actually have a new program launching today at 4 p.m. Eastern. So for those folks who have known, I've run this AI persona Genesis program for the last probably 4 or 5 months, which where we install these AI personas into your ChatGPT account. We're actually coming out with a do-it-yourself program, which is launching today at 4 p.m. Eastern. So I'll be talking more about that towards the end. But that's about it for me, man. What about
Nice.
you? I saw you post about your son on Facebook. He's a cute little guy with his little glasses. He's
Oh,
so
he's
cute.
adorable. And I had I
He's
was, I
cute.
was somewhere the other day, and someone was like, "He has your head," and I'm like, "Yeah, that's pretty accurate. He's like got like probably the same size head as me." And actually, we got some extra feet running around the house this week, and I was fortunate enough to break away to go to the office for a few hours to do this and a couple other things. But he just got a new cousin as of late Tuesday night, early Wednesday morning. So his my sister-in-law, my wife's brother's wife, was supposed to get induced on Thursday and ended up deciding to have it on like into the wee hours of Tuesday night. So the rest this week we're watching the other little ones. I don't know if you saw that on my Facebook there. I posted the other two. I had one of them. They were playing on the laptop and one of them was holding the phone. So I got his cousins at the house for a couple days just to give her a break while the new one's getting welcomed. So yeah,
Excellent.
a lot of movement around the house the last couple of days.
Couple future recruiters there. Um, all right, well let's get on the show here. Today we're going to be talking about business development, which is one of those areas that is obviously critical to the people in this business. It is. Look, at the end of the day, if you can't bring in clients and job orders, you are dead in the water. And of course, I know for a lot of the older folks, the folks that are long in the tooth, been in the business for a long time, veterans, sometimes they're some of the worst at it because if you've been relying on legacy clients for years and then they fall off and then you haven't made a cold call in 10 years and sometimes it's harder to make a cold call when you're a veteran than when you're a fresh-faced rookie who doesn't know any better. And so we'll be talking today about business development, prospecting, cold calls. Not a lot of structure to the show necessarily. Chris and I are just going to riff back and forth a little bit, talk about what I do for business development, how I train it, talk about what Chris does in his own practice. But before we do that, though, guys, before we get into the details here, guys, do me a favor. And for anybody else who can hear us, comment live in the comments. If you have any questions, make sure you comment in there as well, and we'll try to answer any questions that you have. Although we have a hard stop at 12:45, so we're going to be or
Or
1:45
145 or whatever, wherever
Eastern.
they are.
And we'll answer any questions we have up until that point. And if you're watching the replay, comment replay because we want to see who is listening to the show even after the fact. All right. So, with that being said, folks, let's talk about business development. And we could probably categorize business development in a couple different, say, buckets. I think broad buckets. So there's maybe the prospecting. right? Prospecting, LinkedIn, email, cold call, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So different ways you can prospect. But something that I know you want to talk about, Chris, was okay. Let's say somebody replies somewhat positively. What
Now,
do
what do
you
you do?
what do you do? But then, and so there's that bucket, having those initial conversations, and then if we have time, I don't know if we will or not, but if we have time, we could even talk about some of the nuances of the actual sales process itself.
Yeah.
I know for a lot of folks, it's one thing to get a job order; it's quite another thing to get something exclusive or on engagement or something where you're actually working with your client as a partner versus as a, and I almost puke whenever I say this word, vendor. Oh God, don't you hate that?
Well,
Have you heard the word
oh
vendor?
yeah. Well, we do that to ourselves sometimes too. And I
Mhm.
mean, like on that topic, how you have that initial call, it really frames the nature of the relationship going forward. I have seen a lot of times there'll be issues that people bring up in the group that say, have this problem, this situation going on with the client, and I'll think to myself, listen, hindsight's always 2020, but you're like, this could have been headed off like early in the process, right? Like I think, and I've been in this situation myself, like especially early on, a lot of us were just, especially if you're new, you're so excited to get a job order. You see like someone wants to work with you, and you kind of go almost into this deferential mode where you're just like, thank you. Not that you're saying explicitly, but you're almost like, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to work on this. And you just take it, and you take everything at face value
We're
and
not
like the job
worthy.
description. Yeah.
We're
And you're
not
like, thank you so
worthy.
much.
That
I'll go
yeah.
find you exactly what you need. And I think a lot of that call comes down, that initial call comes, confidence is important. Whether you've been doing this for 10 minutes or 10 years, you got to ask the right questions to qualify it. And so many things that we just don't think to ask or are afraid to ask in the beginning. How many other recruiters are working on this? How long, like, have you looked at internal candidates already? Have just, et cetera, et cetera. We could talk through a bunch of those, but I think going in, instead of jumping into like either presentation mode where you just start talking about your firm and everything else, or just grabbing it and running and saying thank you so much, I'll go find you what you need. I think you establish a lot of authority if you listen. The one asking questions is the one running the conversation. Okay, so if you come in and right off the bat you're asking them pointed questions, and I'm not talking about challenging them too openly. I mean, maybe you're challenging to an extent, but I'm saying it's not an adversarial conversation. But like there is stuff that you need to know going in to know if this is worth your time, and you need to ask those questions. And if you're doing that right from the get-go, you will be treated more like a partner and less like a vendor. If you we do it to ourselves, is what I'm saying. You know what I mean, DSP?
Yeah, no, exactly. In fact, when I first got in this business, and of course, this is pretty much the norm for anybody who gets in the business and they're young. I remember. I've been staffing and recruiting ever since I was maybe 21, 22, but I got into search when I was about 24, 25. So that was when I started. Uh, Zale says, "Find the pain points exactly." I'm about to come to that. Thank you very much, Zale, for
That's
the
a good one. Yes.
for the layup or for the assist. So what was this? And I lost my track of thought. So when so when you're young and you get on the phone with a VP, for example, because back in the old days we used the phone instead of Zoom, and I'm glad handing the entire time because I'm just happy to be on the phone with the VP, and that's how you get crappy job orders. That's how you lose a lot of respect with your prospective clients, because the way I look at it is if I have this. Hiring people, hiring a critical, hired for a critical role is a critical thing, right? It's tough. It's really important, right? Just like, for example, let's say you have a tax issue with the IRS, really important, right? Well, if you have a tax issue with the IRS, are you going to go and talk to the first tax attorney that you see who's super glad to be talking to you, and he says, "Oh yeah, of course I can take care of it. Oh, no problem. Of course I can do this. Oh yeah, whatever you need, boss, whatever you need." Versus, I want somebody who comes in with a sense of gravitas, tells me exactly how this conversation is going to go, tells me asks me really tough questions almost where I have to prove myself in order for them to take me on as a client, because I'm going to feel a lot more trust with that individual because they seem much more like an expert, right? And that's really, really important here. And I think part of that, and it only comes to asking tough questions. In fact, I want to talk about specific questions here in a second. But one of the things I think is also very important when you talk to a prospect before the conversation even gets going, a couple of things you can do. One, set the agenda. So tell the prospect, okay, we'll be talking about, I've got this call set for about 30 minutes. We'll be talking about A, B, C, D, whatever the agenda is. And if I can help you, I'll tell you exactly how. And if I can't, this is really important. If I can't, I'm going to point you in the right direction. Either way, I want to make sure you leave this meeting with enough value and maybe some strategies to help you fill this role quickly, or whatever you happen to say, right? But see what I'm doing is I'm setting the agenda. I'm saying we're going to be talking about A, B, C, and D. We set this meeting for 30 minutes. And by the end of this call, I'll tell you exactly how I can help, if I can help, and if I can't, I'll get you pointed in the right direction. Because if you're going to present your solution, which is maybe a exclusive contingency or an engagement or whatever it happens to be, you want them to feel as if they've earned their place on your client list versus the other way around, right? And also builds trust, because what's going to happen, because what you're trying to convey is, I don't need your business, and if I don't think I can help, I'll find someone else who can.
And I
Right?
think
That's a
that,
powerful statement.
and I think that not pretending like you can solve the problem or deliver the solution in like one phone call also is a big thing. And that's part of setting that agenda. So like one of the things that I do is, I basically established, listen, the purpose of this call is to understand if it makes sense to work together. Like I want to understand if this is a project I can help you with, if, and if, you have a certain comfort level with how I operate, et cetera. And I'm explaining to them as part of that agenda that like, if we do decide to work together, like, we're just going to talk about the job in kind of a high level so I can understand how feasible it is, et cetera. We're still going to have a separate meeting to dive into this job in more depth, assuming we sign a contract together. And I'm also going to need to just know that I have the opportunity to speak to anybody else who's a key member of the hiring team. I have found that if they balk at some of that, like that's a big red flag for me, because that is what I do too. And I'm like, if they're like, well, I just wanted to tell you in the next half hour what I need, and I need you to go find it for me, I would be wary of that. If you say, listen, let's spend 20 minutes, let's figure out if it makes sense to work together, I'll send you my agreement. If we decide to move forward, I'd like to take an hour of your time so we can dive into this role in more detail. And I'd like you to invite, other people who will be decision makers in this process. I get some people are like, great, that's awesome. Because I'm not going to pretend that I can understand the need and how they want to convey the opportunity and everything else in like 15 minutes. I just don't. I should preface that, but I should supplement that by saying I currently work on leadership roles and senior individual contributors. Now, if you're just staffing like, general labor, warehouse, office temps, things like that, you don't need to do that. You probably could do it in a half-hour call. Then you're actually complicating things with the client. Like if I was when I was staffing just straight IT temps going out there in droves, updating software and switching out routers and bank branches and stuff like that, if I told them I was going to do that for the process, they'd be like, this is way more than we need. So just also understand like how deep you need to go. But I think again, this goes back to the agenda.
Yeah, and also it's something else you want to consider when you get on a call as well. I think is also, well, so there's a thing that people call rapport, or as I like to call it, report. And people always talk about building rapport in the conversation. Oh gosh, I see a picture of you fly fishing in the background there. Chris, do you fly fish? I fly fish as well. Report building. Do we have reports yet? And that's not really, and rapport building is certainly fine at the beginning of the conversation. But one thing I think is more important is establishing your authority. And so part of establishing your authority obviously is the agenda. We'll be talking about A, B, C, and D, and at the end if it makes sense to talk further, or if I can help you, I'll show you exactly how. If not, and then from there we can schedule a call to talk about the position specifically, or if not, I'll give you points in the right direction. But another way you want to build authority is, what happens quite oftentimes is, and this is what I found, is that people will either A, never talk about what makes them unique amongst all the other field of recruiters out there, right? Because recruiters, we're a commodity. Let's be real. Um, Everybody finds the best candidates. Everybody finds them the fastest. Everybody has the biggest network. Everybody has the most experience. Everybody's a specialist. Blah 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 blah. Blah. So that's all right. So let's get out of the way. We're a commodity. All right. So, so what I found is that if you need to establish your authority in the beginning of the conversation, people either generally don't do it because they're just so happy to be on the phone with the person, or when they do it, they rush through it. They almost feel like they feel bad for, hey, Bob, let me just tell you a bit about us. I hate to do it, but just give me like a couple quick seconds, and they
You're
rush through it.
apologizing for yourself, like for no
Yeah,
reason.
they're apologizing. Like, I'm sorry, I have to introduce myself, but I'm sorry, just listen to me for 30 seconds, please, while I have
Yeah.
to and there's no authority there. And so I call it kind of like flashing the badge, right? You want to be able to flash the badge. I call it status delta, if you want to get the technical term. But all business rapport really is the establishment of a status delta, of your status as compared to the person you're talking to. Think about when you answer the door at 9 o'clock at night, and there's somebody there starts asking you questions. You're gonna say, "Who the hell are you? Get off my lawn!" Versus if they flash their badge and say, "I'm uh, this is Agent Johnson with the FBI," you're going to answer their question because they've just flashed their badge. They've established some authority over you. Well, at least you're more likely to answer their questions than if they didn't flash the badge. So so think about what can you do to flash the badge either before the meeting or at the beginning of the meeting. What I like to do is, instead of just saying, okay, now let's talk about me, because it really should be more about them than anything else. What I generally like to do is I do like to make an excuse, but not an apologetic excuse. More of, hey, let me tell you a bit about for the first couple of minutes before we get into everything else. Let me tell you a bit about myself and my firm and what we do. And here's the key. So everything else makes sense. Doesn't really mean anything, but it's providing a reason that sounds like a legitimate reason. Let me explain who we are, what we do, kind of our place in the market, etc. Just everything else here in the conversation makes sense.
Yeah, and
Does
just so
that
you kind of
work for you?
understand like where I'm coming from and what my
Exactly.
perspective is on the questions that I'm asking and that. And the other thing with like authority along those lines, I think that really shares it, and this is tougher when you're new. I acknowledge this, but asking like pointed questions about the role and really like that shows authority. Okay. And so here's what I mean by that. Like you'll see sometimes there'll be a question in the groups or whatever about someone's working on this role and like the salary's unrealistic, or I'm just not, a lot of that may stem from the fact that you took a job order. They said, we're looking for X. And you said, okay, I'll go find you X. If you're in that call, you can establish a lot of authority by basically pushing back a little. And what I mean is, let's say they're like, oh, David, I know you specialize in SAP. That's great. Blah, blah, blah. Listen, I'd really like to hire like an ABAP developer and I'd like to pay, 75 to 85K. And you'll be like, well,
When I'm done
in my
laughing,
experience, I have, that might be a little low for what you're trying to accomplish. Let's peel that. Let's take a step back and let me understand like what we're trying to do here and help me understand the business need, et cetera, et cetera. And, because I'll get that all the time where I'll say like, okay, someone needs to hire like a CFO and but I want to pay like 90 grand. And I'm like, okay, what does a CFO mean for you? Are we talking about a CFO? Or are we talking about a controller? It's and I don't specialize necessarily in accounting, but just in generally like leadership roles. But if you have any knowledge of the market, and it shows in the questions that you ask and the pushback that you give, where you're like, okay, I understand what you're looking for in the budget you're working within. Based on what I see out there, here are some areas we may need to move some levers. What kind of flexibility do you have? What things can we move around a little? And it'll give you a sense of what you have to work with and how realistic the job is to fill. And quite frankly, it will give them an impression that this person knows what the hell they're talking about.
yeah. In fact, and even beyond that, like, and of course, yeah, an ABAP developer for 80K.
I'm like
I
wildly
mean, I mean,
exaggerating
I mean,
that.
I mean, oh, that was a good one. Woo.
I just made
Um,
his blood pressure go up just like a little bit for a second there.
yeah, I mean, 80K for an ABAP developer, even that was kind of low back when I started recruiting SAP in 2004.
Yeah,
You know what I
exactly.
mean?
That's
Like that's a funny thing about, and this is really kind of like out of left field here, or nichey, but I remember in the SAP space, you don't say you don't say ABAP or ABAP, or you don't say ABAP, you say ABAP, right? But when I was recruiting, whenever I would come across like a good old boy. So sometimes like in the South, you may talk to an SAP manager who's got like the Southern drawl. He's kind of like an old good old boy from back in the day. Maybe he was like a warehouse team manager. Then they got put on SAP
I'm looking for an
implementation team to learn.
ABAP developer. And like,
Oh no, there was no ABAP. ABAP. They be like ABAP was the way they would say it. Like ABAP developer. I can't do the accent, but it was always ABAP, and I always thought it was funny. But anyway, no, so yeah, but back on the conversation, and Zale, I see you asked a question. We'll come to that part here in a little bit. I want to mention a few more things about the sales call, but I do want to hit up your question as far as how far have you gone into a partner's company? But with regard to the qualifying, part of good qualification is really probably the majority of your sales pitch, right? It's more, but yeah, it's just like Chris, it's just the questions that you ask. I want to dive into it a little bit further. So let's say you get on the call, you set the agenda, you flash your badge, you say, "Let me tell you a bit about myself and our firm, exactly what we do, so everything else makes sense." Is that great? They say, "Excellent, great." And you say, "Okay, we do this, and we win these awards, and da 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 da." What whatever your kind of your differentiator is, right? Once you get past that, what I like to ask, very first question I like to ask is, okay, so let me ask you, what was the purpose of you booking a call with me today? Or what are you looking to get out of this call? It's almost like a shot across the bow, because they may spill the beans on everything because it's such an open-ended question, or they may
that's
not. It's a good way just to start the conversation off and see where it goes. And then obviously talk if it's about a specific position, asking some qualifying questions. What is it? We like looking page, just the basics. But then after that, I like to switch gears and start digging around for pain, kind of like as a dentist, because just because a position pays well doesn't necessarily mean it's something that you should want to work on, because there's really not much pain associated with it. Like if it's not very painful to not have somebody hired, then they're going to drag their feet. So I always like to ask questions about. And I like to separate pain in two different areas. There's the broad business pain, which is, okay, so why you're looking to hire? Okay, is anybody in the role right now? What's that causing? How's it cause? How's that? Is that creating issues with the team? How's that affecting? If it's let's say finance and accounting manager, yeah, how's that affecting your month end, your year end, your books? How's it affecting this? And so start asking some of those questions to get a sense of like the general pain, like how critical it is for them to fill this quickly, right? But then there's also but there's all and obviously you want to ask the opposite questions too. Okay, so if you hire somebody tomorrow that walked on the water, what they look like for your team? Well, so you want to ask those questions as well, like what their vision is, or what their dream is, or what their like all the opposite of the pain questions. But once you get past that, what I found is really valuable, especially if you sell a higher level service. So let's say you're not just a contingency recruiter. You don't want to be one of 6 vendors on a search. Ugh, I said vendor. Ugh.
and that's
But
what you are. If there's 6 of you, you're a vendor.
you are a vendor. You are a trusted vendor. That's an oxymoron. But let's say you at a minimum you work exclusively, right? Or you work engaged, retained, or whatever it happens to be. Um, Oftentimes in these sales calls, people come into the sales call looking for options. You want to add another recruiter to the mix. They already have a recruiter they want to put you on to, or something like that. And so if they're coming in with that sort of mentality, and most are, to move them off that path and to get them thinking that I'm actually might make sense to work exclusively, it's also important to ask about the pains associated with what you call a bad solution. And a bad solution is anything that is not your solution. Could be HR, could be job boards. Usually it's other recruiters, use a contingency. So if they're using 2 or 3 other recruiters in the search, and I ask, well, so how long has it been open? 3 months. Okay. And you've got other recruiters working on the search right now. You told me you have 2 recruiters. Yes. Okay. So why haven't you hired anybody yet? Silence and see what they say. Okay, and try to gauge, is there other issues with using those multiple recruiters? Are they not are they not screening candidates? Are you not seeing resumes? Maybe when you give the search out, you see maybe a flurry of resumes first and then nothing. You haven't heard back from the recruiters in 2 weeks, and because a lot of times those bad solutions that they're using come with a set of pains. For using multiple contingency recruiters, for example, again, this lack of communication. Recruiters don't do a deep dive. They're not screening very well because they have to get candidates in very quickly. Receiving multiple or receiving the same candidate from multiple recruiters. All these things are pains associated with that. And if you could try to, in fact, actually, here's a good example. Let's say you offer a long guarantee for engaged clients. Engaged meaning they pay you a deposit up front. When I was in the SAP world, everybody did contingency. Everybody did contingency. It was all 20%. It's just the way it was in the industry because it's very commoditized. And for a company, for your normal SAP director looking for an ABAP developer or a solution architect or whatever it is, why would they pay you 30% on a retainer or an engaged fee when they got recruiters banging down their door willing to take it at 15% contingency? So, so one of the ways I solved that problem, because the old advice I would get from recruiting trainers is know your worth. Hold out for the okay. That sounds great if I know my worth, but what if they don't see the worth in that, right? They're thinking, why would I do that? That's risky. I'll use 8 recruiters and I don't have to pay a thing. I get 8 times the coverage. Well, so how do I convince them, right? Beyond just knowing my worth. And so I offered an exclusive contingency package, and I had an engaged package. It was the exact same price for both. However, in the engaged package, I had a full 1 year replacement guarantee, not refund, but replacement, right? No questions asked.
Yeah.
Versus my normal, anywhere between 30 to 90 day.
And that's what they get. They're getting something for that money up front.
They're getting something for the money up front. I'm making money because I'm closing those engaged searches at a much higher rate than I am on the contingency. So it's like Apple Care, right, for the search. And I used to ask questions about, and this is where you talk about asking questions about pain related questions on bad solutions. So, all right. So I'm curious if you, so I would ask this question often. How soon do you know when someone's not going to work out? Not they start and they're horrible and you get rid of them right away. But I'm talking about they start, they're okay. They're not great. You put them on a performance plan. You try to work with them, but eventually at some point you cut bait. When is that? And I would always hear 6 months, 7 months, something like that. I was always in that general range. So, all right. So if your contingency recruiters are giving you a 90-day guarantee, which is kind of the average in the industry, what good does that do you when you're 6 months in and you have to cut somebody loose because they just weren't cutting it, right? And so that was one of many ways that I was able to sell an engagement through that longer guarantee, and that got that done for me because it wasn't just about the pain of not hiring somebody, but I also want to talk about the pain of using a bad solution, and that's how you pivot into your better solution.
And so I've done exactly what you're talking about, and I know. So it's like when I do engaged searches, I do like routinely like 6 month plus guarantees, especially when they're like management roles, because they'll say, hey, listen, like they're going to be, first few months, they're just getting trained, they're getting ramped up, yada, yada. What people that are listening are probably thinking, and I have a response to it already, is, okay, well, yeah, I don't want to do a longer guarantee. I don't want to be a hook for longer. Here's what I've found. A longer guarantee can be a differentiator against a competitor. What it says to the customer is I stand behind my product because I believe in it more than the other guy. But in my experience, I don't know about you, DSP, but in my experience, most of them fall apart in the first couple months anyway. So I have never done a replacement in month 5, never. But I routinely do 6. So you know what I'm saying? Like the reality for the recruiter is really no different. But like what the impression on the customer is significant in my
we had We had a question here from Mike McCown. What's your close rate for contingent versus retained? Everybody's a little bit different, but I know for me, it was a 20-80 split. 20% close rate contingency typically, and be like 70-80% for, well, I wouldn't say retained. I never did fully retained. I did engage. So there, it was the deposit up front between 5 to 10K, depending on the level of position, and then the balance due upon hire. That was in that 70 to 80K or 80% range close rate.
And I guess the question too, because to make sure we're apples to apples, like close rate, does that mean getting a contract signed? Because I could get contingency contract signed all day long.
Or I guess
Or is
the
it like filling the
deal
job?
done.
Yeah, getting the deal done. I mean,
I would think,
it's
yeah.
it's about the same. I would say not every engaged search. Well, there's two things because there's a couple closes there, right? First, selling an engaged deal, right? Because that's easier said than done. I have found in the last couple of years, as I shifted entirely to that a lot more of them say yes than you think if you present it right. And then in terms of the deal coming into fruition and the collecting the full amount, I would say it's probably about 80 plus percent because there are some that fall off, but most of them get done. Before we go too far down that rabbit hole of contingency and engaged, which I think is really good to explore, especially from a sales perspective, I just want to add one more layer of pain that I think is very impactful and kind of positions you a bit more as a partner. So like, let's say it's the personal pain. How does it affect that manager and their job? Okay. So there's the company and how it affects the company and their goals and won't this suck? We won't be able to produce enough products, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, a lot of people care about their job and how it affects their life, right? So for example, I was talking to someone who was in a manufacturing leadership role and needed to hire another layer under him to handle some more of the production planning, scheduling elements of his job because they were expanding. He was getting more direct reports. His span of control was getting wider. So, because they were growing and they had more solutions they were offering. So this is a new hire to carve out a piece of him. And so some of my questions to really dig into the need related to, listen, how's that feel right now? Like, and how long can you sustain doing both these jobs? So and what that helps me do is that's a qualifying move because what that helps me do is steer them towards, first they'll establish like, listen, I hope I don't have to do this for more than like a few weeks because this is crazy. I'm working tons of hours. My wife is up, bugging me because I'm putting in tons of extra time. I really need to get this hire made. Okay. So if we could pin down the windows of availability you have for interviews, a couple weeks from now, what do those time slots look like? Like, and that's an old move, like the time slot thing, but like I'm connecting it to an emotional need, right? Does that kind of make sense, DSP? Like, okay, I have a problem. Okay, it's clearly top of mind. It's clearly personal. It's clearly affecting this individual. So let's take that and say, okay, let's look at a timeline. Would this timeline make you feel better? Okay, I can meet that timeline, but what I need to do in order to make that happen from you is I need to block out some of your schedule so that we can get some people in here to meet with you. Can we do that? You follow what I'm saying? So that's just the other layer of pain I want to cover because people at the end of the day really care about themselves and how this affects them personally and how it's affecting their life. And if there is a extra weight on them because of this job, and that's not always going to be the case, but if you sense that there's extra weight on this person, that tells you that they are going to more than likely be serious about filling this role and they are more than likely worth your time.
Which is reason number 83 why you should be working with hiring managers and not just HR, because hiring managers are the one feeling the pain. So one of the many reasons, and you're right about that. And because people generally, when they make buying decisions, people generally run from pain more than they run towards pleasure. Pain is a much bigger motivator than pleasure is, and pain is not just business pain; it's also personal pain. It's also the pain of them losing momentum in their leadership career, losing the confidence of their senior leadership because if they can't get the job done, and oftentimes, these folks that are used to being promoted every few years, if they lose that momentum, that's not a good thing for their mental state, and also just for their career, for their or their plans to do whatever they want to. Usually they want to be promoted, get to the C-suite or whatever it is, or their plans for career growth, I guess, the way I was looking at it. So yeah, but people generally run from pain more than they run towards pleasure. And so the more that, but talking about pain is a hard thing for any recruiter to talk about. So just the fact that you're asking pain related questions is already setting you apart from most, because most are not going to do it. It's uncomfortable. And the crazy thing is people, recruiters don't want to make the decision maker feel uncomfortable, right? They want to glad hand them. But it's kind of like going to the dentist, and if the dentist doesn't want to make you uncomfortable, there's probably not a very good dentist, right? You want the dentist to going to dig around, see, does this hurt? Does this hurt? Oh, that hurt. Okay, are you sure that hurts? Yes, it does. Okay, that's where we need to fix. And you want a dentist like that. Yeah, so it is important to stay in the pocket with your prospects and ask those questions. Don't, and not to be afraid of that. Um, I do want to ask Zale, and hopefully he can clarify. Because I want to make sure I clear this question before we wrap. And I didn't quite understand it. He said, "How far have you gone into a partner's company?" I was thinking about being part of the partner company for at least 15 days to gauge the culture and review more possible needs of the partner. So I'm assuming that Zale is talking about a new client, maybe somebody on a retainer, and talking about, I guess, maybe embedding yourself into the client company, perhaps. Uh, is that what you're reading here?
That's kind of I'm taking away from it, which I think what the scenario is describing is probably a bit impractical in terms of like time spent.
Mhm.
Like what I try to do.
Maybe for like an RPO or something, I could see that
Perhaps,
maybe.
but like, so the searches that I work on are usually of significant strategic importance. So most of the time, there's a few cooks in that kitchen, and they've got, as we know, differing opinions, right? And we know that a lot of times we get to the end of a recruiting process, and several people will interview someone, and then ultimately there might be someone who's like, "That's not what I'm looking for at all," and it nixes the whole thing, and you're starting over, and that sucks. And I actually describe that pain in the initial conversations I have with customers when I explain my process of it. And depending on the level, we're not going to do this for like an accounts receivable clerk, but like we're hiring like a
Yeah.
CFO. I want to understand, like, are there board members involved in this? Are there other members of the executive team we need to talk to, et cetera, et cetera? I'm going to want to talk to, 3 or 4 stakeholders individually and get a sense of what their priorities are for this position, et cetera, et cetera. And then I'll come back, I'll reconcile all that, give you like a report. And by the way, this is after they've paid me a retainer. I don't do this shit on spec as part of the qualifying process. But like, I have those meetings. I'll come back to the primary hiring authority, note any discrepancies, et cetera, which does help us build consensus early on and saves us time later. But where that relates to his question is, I also have the opportunity to engage with a number of touch points within the company while embarking on the search and getting a feel for the culture a bit more, not just because like I looked at their website or I talked to one person and he seems like a good guy and he'd be great to work for, but like I work regionally. So rarely, except for like COVID, like I not visit a customer site. And I mean, here's the thing. They already sent me a check. It's usually a decent sized one. I'll drive an hour and go spend the day. You know what I mean? So that, again, this is tough to do when you're doing contingency, but if you can commit a little more time up front, that's a couple of the ways that I've had a chance to gauge it a bit more. But that being said, there's only so deep you can go and still have it be practical. I don't know. What's your take on that?
Same as Joe. If you're doing like if you're doing an engage retain search, it does make sense to at least talk to some different stakeholders within the company, get their feel for it. Also, going Glassdoor and find some of maybe some negative reviews and talk about that. Let's flesh some of these things out. Because yeah, if you want to do quality recruiting, I mean, we're not talking about posting a job up on a job board and just praying that somebody applies to your job before they apply to your client's job. There's also posted on the same job board, right? It's that thing that a lot of recruiters, when the market's really good, they tend to fall back into. But when you want to really recruit a quality passive candidate, right? Someone, and you got to convince them, you're going to need to have a real finger on the pulse of your client, their culture, what they want, what they're like. Every company's different. The leadership is different, et cetera. So yeah, I think it's really, really important. And again, it also helps the client, right? One of the things that, when people make a buying decision, and Chris, I know you have to go here in just a few minutes, so we'll
Yeah,
cut
several
this
minutes. I
here.
can, like, yeah.
Oh, do you? Okay.
Yeah, I
But
could go to like 7 more minutes. I'm good. Yeah.
Okay. When people make a buying decision, one thing I've learned is that when people make a buying decision, right, even if you're signing a contract, the minute they do that, buyer's remorse starts to set in, right? It happens with almost every purchase. If you go buy a brand new TV and it's exciting, and the moment you buy it and you pull out of the parking lot, you're excited to have it, but part of it's like, did I make the right decision? But the thing that helps with that is the fact that you've got the TV in hand. Let's say you purchase a TV, but you're not going to get it for a month. Well, there's some buyer's remorse going to set in between now and then because it's a delayed purchase. So if you sign an agreement, if you win a new engaged or retained client, and you start the search and you don't produce any candidates for a week or two, which could happen on maybe a longer search, well, there's a long time between any action that you've taken that gives them confidence that you'll complete the search. Versus when you sign that agreement, then okay, now let's start the process. Let's schedule interviews with the stakeholders and with you, and let's do this and let's do this. Now you're taking
Stuff's
a lot of
happening.
action. Stuff's happening right after they make that purchase decision, and you're giving them peace of mind that okay, they made the right decision. So even beyond your ability to recruit effectively and to make sure that you understand the client's culture, but even just from a buyer's remorse perspective, you want to give the client small wins or let them see immediate action instead of just saying, okay, great, now that I've got your check, you'll hear back from me in 2 weeks with a short list.
Right. And that is actually a major, I found it was a turning point for me a few years ago in shifting to getting some kind of payment up front. And again, of course, depending on the deal, the nature of it, that's sometimes that amount is varied, the percentage is varied because you know how every situation is unique, but whatever. The point is, if you're going to secure some payment up front, if you can articulate that there are things that are going to happen that you're going to do that wouldn't happen in a typical recruiting engagement because they're not feasible in a contingency scenario where someone's just taking on as many jobs as they can because they're just trying to play the numbers and close a deal that month. And you're like, listen, I can give your job the attention it requires. Here's the way we do it right. I spend this time with you. I meet with these people. I'll get some consensus. Maybe we use some personality assessments or whatever. Which, like, listen, a lot of times they're not expensive or even free. So, but if you work those in as part of like your process, to David's point, like not only do they feel like stuff's happening, like once it's engaged, but even prior to it, when you're trying to convey why, when they're looking at other options that are purely contingency, and you're saying, listen, I can do a great job for you, and here's how, and here's what you're getting for that money up front. That I think helps communicate like, why they should do it in the first place.
Yeah, in fact, there's a great line that I'm sure you've heard. No one ever wants to see how the sausage is made,
Right.
and that it, which is when I first got into this business, my first trainer I had at the time, which I think this is bad advice, but she told me that she said never tell the and never tell the client how he got the resume, right? It should be a mystery. Get the candidate, submit them in, but never tell the client how we got them. And I always thought it was bad advice because um, um, there's no value. I mean, the value's there in the candidate, but look at this day and age, the market is so commoditized, right?
Yeah.
And no one wants to see how the sausage is made unless I'm claiming to sell the finest sausage that will ever touch your lips. It's high priced. It is hard to get. There's a waiting list on it. And you say, well, okay, but it's flipping sausage. Au contraire. Let me show you how it's made. We fly in the sacred cows from India, and then we fly in the spices from Persia, and then and then here's how it's made, and then it's handmade and hand blah 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 blah, and we put it on a velvet tray and whatever it is. I don't know how sausage is made, but companies that sell high end products, Corvettes, for example, if you buy a Corvette, you can actually watch your Corvette be made on the line, right? Because they want you to see the care and the quality that goes into it because it justifies the high price, right? And so and so ultimately, people, or think about it like this: there's another line that says, "People don't buy a drill. They're not interested in the drill. What they really want is a quarter-inch hole in the wall," and that's very true. However, if there are 10 drills they're trying to make a purchase decision on, now they care about the drill because now they need to be sure. Well, I want to make sure I choose the right drill so I can get the hole that I want. So in those
And I want to do
cases
it
where
right
it
the
isn't
first time, not have to do it a bunch of times because
exactly, and so then it makes sense to talk about the drill. It does make sense in certain situations to explain how you do it and what your process is. It's not to sell them; it's to justify what you are selling them, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, most of them that I dealt with, even if the resume came off a freaking Indeed or whatever, I'm not. I don't sell based on like, oh, I have like access to. Listen, I've done this for a long time, and I know for a long time the sell was we have a database, we have a database. Well, guess what? Everyone can find everyone. I don't care what anyone fucking
Oh
says.
yeah.
Everyone can find everyone. The value add is really understanding the need, and I don't just mean saying it on your website, but really understanding the business need, effectively communicating that opportunity to the right people, because you could have the best list of source people ever, but if you're hitting them with the wrong messaging, you're going to miss by a mile. And delivering the person that they need so they can drill that hole once, and they won't care if they literally, you found them on Indeed or they're right on LinkedIn or they even know the person,
Mhm.
because you did all the free work to establish that this is the person who's going to be able to drill that hole, and the problem has been solved. That is what they're paying for. That's my take.
100%. It's all that confidence. So you want them to have that confidence that they made the right decision. At the end of the day, your client has to be the big winner in this, right? You're there to serve the client, and a lot of times you know what you're doing in your mind, but they have no idea
And if
what
you
you may be
tie too
doing
much of
behind
your
the scenes.
value to the finding of the
Mhm.
person, then that's when you're scared of letting them know how you found them. That's when
And
you're
your
worried
commodity.
about going around. That's when they're like, oh, we knew this person already, and you get dicked around on getting paid. Like if you tie it too much to the finding of the person, like we used to, I think
Mhm.
you get into some trouble.
And it made sense back in the day when we used to do that because when I first started in search, this before job, really before
Before
job boards were a
LinkedIn,
thing,
before
and before LinkedIn. So the names of database were actually gold because you
yes,
got that by referrals and by ruse calling, and that was it.
100%.
That's the only way you can find names. And now, yeah, now it's God, it's so I can map an entire market for a niche in a week of LinkedIn and just extract all the data into my database. So the database itself is not a big deal. It's about the relationships and the process that you have, which ultimately kind of makes your job harder, right? Than back in the day, we just show up with a resume and that was the value. So something to consider. I just realized we didn't even talk about prospecting. Just strictly about sales calls. Well,
We could do that
I
next
know
week
we
with Neil.
next week. Yeah, let's talk about prospecting next week because that's an area that I love prospecting, and I'm sure a lot of folks are saying, Chris, David, that's all great, but how do I get the meeting? So next week we'll
Sure. We
talk
put
about
the
how
we
to
put
get
the
the meeting.
chicken and the egg in wrong order, maybe this time.
That's
But
right.
I
That's the
think
beauty of the
if
show,
if
though.
afterwards if afterwards somebody watches the next episode first and then this episode, it'll all make sense together.
It all makes sense together. That's right. Well, that's it, guys. We're going to wrap this up. I know, Chris, you've got to get going. You've got a meeting coming up. You got to prep for. I do want to tell everybody here. We are, even though Neil isn't here, I am going to promote Neil and his company. So if anybody is needing any sort of back office staffing help, right, as an employer of record, contract staffing, etc., invoice funding, reach out to backofficestaffing.solutions.com/contact. And for me, I am, many folks know, I have become a bit of an AI expert, specifically around the subject of AI personas.
Flashing that
Uh,
badge.
and we're gonna flash that badge here. Well, for the last I think 4 months, right? 4 months, maybe 4.5 months. I've been doing dozens and dozens and dozens of one-on-one consulting sessions with clients. But at this point, I charge about $1,500 for these sessions. They're kind of expensive. So if you're looking for a do-it-yourself AI persona program, my AI persona blueprint is dropping today at 4 p.m. It's a pre-release, FYI. So, but the order page is going to be up at 4 p.m. And it'll be released on September 25th. And if you order as a pre-release, you get 75% off of what it's going to be priced at post-launch. So, go to realdsp.me/blueprint. However, it's not going to be on sale until 4 p.m. Eastern today. All right. So, realdsp.me/blueprint. All right. So that said, let's wrap this up. Chris, any final words or anything that you want to add in there?
No, I mean, if I start to try to use some final words, it's gonna be another half hour. So I'll see you all next week.
All right. Well, we'll leave this with a little bit of a humor and a joke. So, because I love this joke, a Roman walks into a bar, holds up two fingers, and says, "I'll take 5 beers, please."
Oh,
I'm
dad
sure some of you
jokes.
got it, some of you didn't. All right. Bye, everybody. See you next week.
See ya.